Oh, yeah, that's the next meeting and then, yeah.
Right, yeah.
I forgot to tell you, Elise, you know that handout,
Yes,
Elisa was gonna hand that out
okay,
during citizen comment. I
Yeah.
forgot to alert you to that. That
Gotcha.
works for you.
Not during the executive
Yeah.
session, no.
I meant to touch base with you and say that worked for you, and I forgot. It's-
Just a heads up, you guys, the top of the order is gonna be an executive session, so get comfortable, then we're gonna kick you out for 20 minutes or so.
Well, then I'll just handle these out right now, because we are part of the street committee, and I just want to
We're
get,
doing public comment after the executive session.
I just want to hand them to the people, so you have them, so you can read them
Okay.
later. I'm not making any comments.
All right.
I
Like
you
to call-
already have one, I think.
I'd like to call the meeting to order, 6 o'clock. Thank you all very much for being here.
And then we'll leave.
thank you.
Thank you. She was part of the
you.
committee. So that's-
Yeah. I don't think
So
you'll have one yet.
just, we can't talk about, the committee or anything.
Correct.
Yeah.
Unless
That-
it's under
that's
public
fine, I'm
comment.
not
Yeah.
trying to make
Special meetings,
Yeah.
to make sure.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah,
You are-
the rule for special,
So there you go.
I got it.
You have.
specific,
Yes.
thank you.
You can't say they're not.
Okay.
Come back.
Well, no, you can
That's
come
okay.
back. So we have,
We'll go online if we need
we
to.
have an executive session for 20 minutes and then after that, we'll open it up for.
Well, we can always sign on.
Right, you can do that too,
Yes.
absolutely. Thank you.
Hey, thank you,
Yeah,
Elise
thank you.
and Tom.
As was more than alluded to, we are going to convene into executive session under RCW 42.30.1101I to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency matters relating to agency enforcement actions or to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency litigation or potential litigation to which agency, the governing body, or member acting in an official capacity is or is like to become a party, and public knowledge regarding the discussion is likely to result in an adverse legal or financial consequence to the agency. We'd like to go into executive session, and we'll start out with a 20-minute block. So there is no need for a motion. Staff is going to proceed as directed by council. All right, we have anybody there? Is anybody in the gallery?
Mary Repar,
Okay,
so public comments.
this is an
Mary.
opportunity for public comment. Mary, would you like to speak?
Good. And raise your hand if you want to speak. Okey-dokey. Okay, go ahead, Mary.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Actually, I have nothing to say this evening, but thanks a lot for the opportunity. You're competing with the Democratic convention here. So,
Yep.
good
Okay.
luck. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks, Mary.
All right, next up is, we have Liana discussing approving a revised Skamania County Building Inspector Agreement.
Yeah, so at the last meeting, we talked about revisions to the contract. And these are the revisions as discussed. It removed the refund of the fees for the previously approved contract.
Make a motion to approve the revised addendum number 3 to the interlocal agreement for building inspection and plan review services between the city of Stevenson and Skamania County.
Second. We have a first and a second. Is there any discussion? We should wait for,
Stall,
Dave.
stall for.
so that's the guy in the wings going.
I heard the door, I heard the door. There he is.
We're waiting for you, my man. Any discussion?
Yeah, you can shut it. Any discussion, Dave?
I don't have any discussion.
All right.
All in favor, say aye.
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 I.
Wait.
No, really, silly.
David. Bill.
All right, now, Robert.
The Rocco appeal hearing update.
Just to inform the council that on August 13th, 2024, the Shorelines Hearing Board issued their opinion regarding the pedestrian access on the property that's under potential development by FDM Development. The hearings commissioner approved the shoreline permit that was issued on January 22, 2024. As affirmed, so the project may continue at this point. However, the applicant, or the petitioner in this case, does have certain appeal rights. 30 days from August 13th would be the deadline for any appeal to a superior court. And I believe there's a 10-day appeal right, or a 10-day deadline to file a motion to reconsider if that parties so choose. So, but the findings of fact, conclusions of law and order are now a matter of public record and available on the Shorelines Hearing Board website.
Thank you.
And how much time did you have to spend on that? Robert?
It took legal counsel spent just under $20,000 in addressing the issues raised, responding to the issues, and participating in the hearing and post-trial hearing briefing. So it was approximately just literally a couple $100 shy of $20,000 for legal fees, expenses.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. And feel free to, while we're live, to tell Ben tell everybody what a great job Ben did.
As I pointed out earlier, and I would like to continue to point out, and I will shout it from the mountaintops, that this decision is, in my opinion, 90% based on Ben Schumacher's work with planning, with approval of the permit, and everything he did to defend the planning commission's decision on the shoreline permit. I believe he did an excellent job, and I believe that was the same statement that was made by the counsel for the FDM development as well. Attorney
Ben.
firms, yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
Good job, Ben. All right, Liana.
So now moving on to the Transportation Benefit District, we need to adopt a resolution to set a public hearing date for adopting an ordinance to then have the council assume the powers of the Transportation Benefit District. So this resolution is just saying that at the September 19th meeting, we will be having a public hearing on the topic.
I would like to move to approve resolution 2020-385, setting the time and place for a public hearing for consideration of assumption of the rights, powers, functions, and obligations of the Stevenson Transportation Benefit District as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a first and a second, so I'm gonna chime in on this one. This is part of the mechanism that has to be set in motion to start collecting sales tax. As it was identified as a priority, as a way to help out the rates for the rate payers. So this is part of that priority. Has to happen in this order. The thing that we also have to remember is that it's not a slam dunk just putting it on the ballot. So if it requires additional funds to get the word out, then it should be a collaborative effort to figure out how we're going to find that money in the budget. And I don't think that a simple ballot or just in the pamphlet is going to give this the gravitas that you have decided that it deserves. So keep in mind that this, we're talking about is this for now, to talk about this, but make sure that this is the priority that you said you wanted it to be. And this is, if you're not going to make it a priority, this is going to be not needed. So keep that in
So if
mind.
we need to do a mailer, be ready to
Spend
figure
some
out
money.
where in the budget we're gonna bring that money
Yes, sir.
forward so that we can pay for that.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
got
That's
it.
exactly what I wanted to make sure that I said. So that's my part of discussion. Any
Yeah.
other discussion?
No, I agree. I mean,
We all want to do, that was kind of the point, was to keep rates down. We're trying to find ways, so.
Good. All in favor, say aye.
I,
Any opposed? Thank you.
And we have a draft ordinance now, I need to make some tweaks
Yep.
after I've been.
Okay.
So you'll see that before the packet.
All right, we need a new committee member for the law enforcement contract discussions. I usually said that. The next topic of discussion is adding a committee member to the law enforcement contract discussions from city council.
and the
We've been
reason
accused of mumbling into the microphone, so I'm gonna try my best to
Enunciate.
actually speak.
the reason that I brought this up to Liana was because Paul was on it with me. And so I just felt like we needed to have one more member of the council on that.
So are you looking for a volunteer since I'm the only one that doesn't have a committee?
Feel the pressure.
That sounds good.
I mean, you can do it. I wouldn't mind being on it either, but if you'd like to, you absolutely
No, I
can.
don't.
I'd be willing to volunteer.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm cool with something.
And if someone else wants to take my place, that's fine too.
I think having you on there is
I'm gonna work
important,
with
Dave.
you.
No, I think having Dave on there is important, so.
And we've already had one meeting, and I think that meeting actually went really well.
It's just limited to previous year dollar amounts and we're fine.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's.
Does anybody else
that's
like to
exactly-
throw their name in the proverbial hat?
I thought it was Chuck.
Okay, all right, so would anybody like to make a motion?
I'd like to make I haven't made a motion tonight. I'd like to make a motion
The
to
night is
appoint,
young, but feel
to
free.
appoint Chuck to the Law Enforcement Contract Committee in addition to Dave Cox, period.
Second.
First and a second, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
I,
All right.
Welcome aboard. Liana?
Hey, sorry.
Oh, these guys are
Multiple
bugging out
hats
now, right?
tonight. Yeah, wearing multiple hats, so taking minutes as well. Finance policy deep dive. I have included in the packet and I'll share the screen as well. The the current financial policy. And this financial policy was established, I think in 2018 or 2019. It was a year or two after I got here. And what it does is it outlines what the city's financial goals are. And then it talks about multiple policies that the city has in place. And the reason why we're having this discussion is one of the strategies and tasks sort of in the strategic plan was related to financial health. And so this policy sets up the actions that council takes and kind of the guardrails that you have to ensure that the city maintains financial health. And so there's some general policies in various aspects of the city's finances to ensure that it stays within its means. So again, I don't know how much I'm not trying to read the entire thing to you. But the general policies are kind of just overarching. Revenue policies, again, the goal is to make sure that everything's diverse and that we have a balance of reliable revenue streams as well as those that are variable to ensure that we can provide a consistent level of service. And so again, current expenditures are funded by current revenues. So if we have what you're seeing throughout the country right now is everyone's concerned because of the ARPA funds that are going away. And so one of the things, and these are the it's COVID money, the American Rescue Plan Act. We didn't receive very many because we're a small community and it was done on a per capita basis. Other agencies and organizations received a lot of money to stand up programs and to operate those programs. And they're now trying to figure out ways to fund them ongoing. The city's policy is that if we get a one-time revenue source, we don't use it to pay for ongoing things.
Right.
One-time revenue is a one-time cost or expense if it comes to that. So
Capital expenditures.
right, more or
We don't create a
less,
program based on a one-time.
Right.
correct, and we don't create a program for grants, through grants either.
Right.
We're not set up like that, typically those are like Department of Health or Parks and Rec type of things, which we don't necessarily focus on. And we, again, try to follow the BARS codes or generally accepted accounting practices. So BARS is the state system, so it's budget and accounting system. And so we use that modified version. And so again, revenues that we receive, some of them are restricted for specific purposes. And so one of the things that we talked about yesterday was, I don't know, we didn't go into a lot of detail, but was lodging tax funds. Lodging tax funds are monies that we receive from hotels that the people that stay there pay. And so there's a portion that comes back as a sales tax credit and then a portion that they pay in addition. And so we get, in essence, 0.4%. I have to do the math on it. But that's how much we get in tax from the hotels and transient lodging. So if you have an Airbnb or a vacation rental, they also pay that. So less than 30 days. And the funds for that can only be used for events to, again, put heads in beds. So it can be for, so we pay the chamber to advertise, to bring people to the city, to create events. So Blues and Brews gets money. The Waterfront Festival gets money. The Christmas in the Gorge, because all of those activities bring people here for overnight stays. And so that's what happens in the fall. We'll do a call for applications. People will apply for those funds. So those are grant funds given. And then even if the city had a process or had something we want to use those funds for, we apply for those funds. And then those funds are allocated through that process and only for that use. It cannot be used to fund for parks. It can't be used for a general community thing. In talking with the auditor previously too, we had been paying for the farmers market out of those funds. He said it was kind of a gray area because of the way that our farmers market is. It's not necessarily a tourist draw. So we took it out of those funds. However, if it were the Portland market, that's more of a tourist draw. So it just kind of depends on
Interesting.
whether it's, so, one thing also, we used funds for the exhibit hall, at the fairgrounds, because they needed money for a re-roof. And they had a grant, they asked for some money, from tech, I believe it was like $15,000. In talking with, the auditor and the city attorney, the exhibit hall is used a majority of time for community events over tourism events. And so that's where that decision was made to take it out of the tourism tax funding and put it more, and pay for it out of the, general fund. And so when we were talking about the plaza project, the city attorney provided language and, rationale as to why the TAC funds could be used for the plaza, because it had historically been used for a plaza in Vancouver. And the types of events that occur in that plaza are ones that we already fund through the lodging tax.
Just a quick question, the ARPA funds,
Right.
have they been designated for anything?
So ARPA funds can only be used for specific things, and so infrastructure, ARPA funds would be for water and sewer infrastructure only, and other health-related items. A couple meetings ago, council chose to put it towards the wastewater treatment plant over a sewer line extension project.
Right.
And so those are gonna be going towards the wastewater treatment plant project.
The funds we did receive.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
There's also, I mean, it's kind of laughable, we get restricted street revenue, but it's $30,000 to fund your streets. And we spend way more than that, and so the city allocates, yes. That's our allocation of fuel tax, it's not much,
God.
and
That's why they're
so.
not sidewalks here.
That's
And
laughable.
so, right, and so what the city decided, so we get 1% of sales tax. So when you pay 7.7%, 1% of that comes to the city. And it's more or less unrestricted. And so what the city has chosen is to take half of that, and instead of it going to the general fund, it's going into the street fund. And so that's how we fund our streets. There's water and sewer funds are restricted only, like their specific purpose, it's a proprietary utility. Because of the size of our city, we're allowed to have a combined water sewer fund. Other larger cities are required to have them be separate. There is a benefit to have them being together. And we can separate them. It's just that cash carryover is a lot more manageable when it's shared because we're small.
Yeah.
So, we do have separate expenses allocated for those, and separate revenues as well. But in general, it's a blended fund. But they only are used for water and sewer purposes. It's not used to pay for streets. It's not used to pay for other things.
Back up and ask a quick
Mhm.
question on the bed, heads in bed, part of that. I read someplace that you had to be able to show at some point that they came from over 50 miles away. Is that
There's a report that people make, that people have to provide before they can get their final invoice.
yeah, so that's.
So depending on what the project is, that report is filled out more or less completely, but for an infrastructure project, I wouldn't expect someone to fill that out for how many people came, because it's a one-time type of thing.
Yeah.
But for events, yes.
Okay.
And there's multiple ways that they can calculate that, if based off of tickets, based off of a poll, based off of an estimate. So there's different ways.
Okay.
When we go through the budget, again, budget revenues are conservatively, and let's see. Again, not using deficit financing and borrowing to support ongoing operations. The enterprise funds and internal service operations will be self-supporting. So again, your utilities, and equipment services will be self-supporting. So your fees have to be enough to do cost recoup. Same for, the goal that we have too is so that the development review, building activities and other user charges shall fund 100% of the cost for those. So when we were reviewing the fees, that's why the fees went up, was because we were trying to match the time and the expense that it takes to review those permit applications. What else? Again, trying to ensure that if someone is charged a fee, then it's equivalent to the service that they're being provided. Before accepting grants, again, ensuring that there's the implications of ongoing obligations. And then everything will comply with the guidance of the grants. And then if anyone wants to donate money, again, ensure that donation policy of the donor is complied with and followed. And then expenditure policies. Again, making sure that the expenses don't exceed projected revenues. We do budget amendments throughout the year, depending on how things are coming in. So that's when I provide the quarterly reports. There's that graph. And so I try to, it's very challenging sometimes, especially for, it's not a linear progression for revenues nor expenses. And so I try to have that graph to trend when we receive revenues and when we receive expenses, so that we kind of can tell whether or not we're on track with where we should be that time of year. And so that's sort of what those charts are showing you. And it's to make sure that if we do need to course correct, we can do so in a timely manner, so that if our revenues aren't coming in, we can look to make sure that we cut off any expenditures if needed.
The things we're supposed to keep 10% in reserve on most of these line items, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's not, so and that's the ending cash balances are 10% of your operations and maintenance expenditures. And so that I'll point that out when we go through the budget as far as what 10% is and where that current ending cash balance is at in the budget. Again, we'll adopt and maintain a balanced budget. I believe it's state law. Let's see. Yeah, any surpluses will be used to go to reserves more or less. And ensure we set aside costs and revenues, ensure we set aside money to replace items and capital assets and equipment, and replacing and ensure the sufficient replacement of vehicles and equipment. And it's the annual financial plan of the city implementing council goals and objectives. And so again, there's some state law that has deadlines as far as what needs to be presented to council and when it needs to be presented to council. And so that's why in your budget calendar, the first presentation of the budget is in September, because it has to be before the first Monday in October. And there's a couple of timelines as well for when we have to have the public hearings, but ultimately the budget needs to be approved by December 31st. If it's not, and I have experienced in this, if it's not approved by December 31st, ideally by the first meeting that you have the next year, otherwise you're operating the city at risk because no expenditures are authorized after the first of the year.
We had, the first year we had a special meeting once I was elected, to approve the budget, so we wouldn't do that. When Dave and I were in. Yeah, so I know we run into making sure our timing is met as a city, so.
Yeah. I mean, it happens, but ultimately. Capital management project, policies, again, so, the capital facilities plan. That council receives on an annual basis, the CIP, making sure that, the capital facilities plan is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and it's a 6-year plan. And talks about all of the capital improvements that are included in, all of the plans and align with the city priorities. And so that's why we review it on an annual basis to make sure that it, is included, because we use that then as a planning tool for this budget and ongoing budgets, because it takes time to plan those projects. Again, making sure that we maintain, our assets and the reserves for that. And then it describes what is capitalized. So something that's over $5,000 and over, a useful life of 1 year. So, with that being said, our laptops are not capital assets, our desks would not be capital assets, so. Those would fall under the small and attractive items. And so again, trying to keep track of them. So all of our computers have, ID tags, and we keep track of those on a regular basis as well.
So are we gonna be looking at a new CFP this next year?
June, so, we decided to do the CIP and the transportation plan at the same time, because they kind of coincide. It makes sense to have we kind of, okay, well, what street improvements do we need to make? And then we also do the utilities underneath, so it just makes sense to kind of do them all at the same time.
What month, remind me what month that was at? I mean, I think we just.
So we
did it,
start, the first hearing is in May, the second hearing is in June,
right.
because the TIP has a, June 30th, deadline for approval.
Right.
So again, it kind of goes over what our small and attractive assets are, transferring, assets if needed, making sure that, so for example, if the, water sewer fund purchased an item and it now needs to go to the street fund, that the appropriate, cash transfer takes place for the value of the asset. We don't really do that because we have our equipment services fund. But if that were to take place, again, it goes over, quarterly budget reports being required. Again, that's state law to present to council. We do it every month, actually, at the end of your, packet in the informational section, there's the financial report. So that's really there on a monthly basis. But state laws, quarterly at a minimum. And again, the annual financial report, that's a state law, 150 days from the end of the year. So roughly around May 30th, those are due. And then we are requesting, annual audits, but with the constraints from the state, they try to fit us in when they can. This year it was required because we had a single audit because of the amount of federal funds that we expended, but that won't always be the case. So we try to get it on an annual basis. If not, it'll be every 2 years. What else? Debt policies. So a lot of this goes into how we will spend any loans that we have. Again, won't use debt to pay for current operations. And we try not to overextend beyond the useful life of the improvements, unless it's funded by USDA Rural Development.
Yeah.
USDA, they have very low interest loans, and they go for 40 years, that your payments are low. you're paying for 40 years though. So it all, depends on what your needs are. There's also a lot of paperwork involved in those. But the other thing too, that was talked about, as part of the sewer committee was the general obligation debt will not be used for self-supporting enterprise activity. And where this comes into play is when we talked about using property taxes to pay for sewer projects. So that would go against that, item 3. And so if that is something that council is wanting to allow, then the policy would need to be changed to allow for that.
Hmm.
What else? Again, making sure that we invest prudently. When we have our city's funds invested in 3 different ways. Just, we have a balance in the bank and they invest it as they do. And then though, whatever revenues they get offset the fees that we have. The other one is we use the local government investment pool, and that's run by the state. It has a lower rate of return than other avenues, but it's very liquid. So if we needed money today, we could get it out today. There's no problem. But again, it's kind of a low rate of return because of that. We also have funds in, it's called time value investments. And so these are generally bonds and we tier them. So they are, in essence, there's a bond coming up every 6 months, which has pluses and minuses depending on what the market's doing. But again, and all of these bonds comply with what our requirements are to make sure that they're safe and secure. Again, the reserve policies, making sure that we have 10% of the O&M costs to cover any expenses. There's an unemployment reserve, because so the city self-funds the unemployment fund. We don't have that much turnover, so we don't want to pay unemployment fees. And we haven't had to set aside any for that since I've been here. We have an equipment replacement, rental and replacement fund that we put money to, and that's sort of where all the costs go for fuel and everything. And then whatever additional reserves are needed. So for the USDA loans, they require reserves. So when you see the budget, there's a reserve fund in there, and that's required by the loan that we have. I think this is the last. So we have a cost allocation policy. And so what this does is if for any costs that we get that are shared amongst departments or amongst funds, this explains how they're allocated. In some ways, we follow the BARS manual. So my salary and benefits, I allocate based on where I'm working that day. And then my all us other associated costs go with those as well. Same with the deputy clerk treasurer, salary and benefits, and then the equipment services fund. Those costs are allocated based on the miles driven and the number of hours worked. So staff again allocates their time based on where they worked, and at the end of every month, they their timesheets are combined, and then there's a percentage of I worked in these departments, 50% water, 50%, a third, or however it's allocated. And then we have the miles driven in this by staff as well. And so the combination of those allocations then goes into the calculation for the rate to what is charged then that month for those.
So I understand you correctly, salaries are allocated across the other line items and depending where you're
right. So
There's no single line items for staff, for salary.
no. No staff works in one place here. I mean, I think Devin and Cody are maybe the most myopic, working in wastewater most of the time, but they also work in water and streets, and others, depending on what everyone else needs help with. And they're also on call too, so they do that on-call rotation, so they work also in the water department.
So with those allocations, are those for all staff, whether salaried or hourly? So like Ben's salary or any of or basically there'll be a percentage every month that'll go to these different charge to these different amounts.
Right, so for Ben, he'll work, if he's working on current planning, if he's working on future planning, if he's working on sewer stuff, if he's working on a street project, he will put his time there and then his costs will be allocated based on where his time goes.
Interesting.
With this staff, again, yeah, you're just not, no one's only ever doing all of one, it would be split to whatever it is they're doing.
So there wouldn't really be any way of putting an administrative piece in each of those line items.
There kind of are, it depends on, the fund, but I think water, sewer and streets all have like an administrative salaried, I'd have to check to see how it's set up. But I do believe those three have an administrative line item versus your operations.
Yes,
Some of those haven't combined, but
how about strictly administrative work? Does anybody do like HR?
yeah, you're looking at her.
You're the HR officer?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so where do you take that money from?
I put it in the general admin, so, and so down here, we'll go for more allocated costs. So, other allocated costs, so I mean, even like the city attorney, whenever, depending on what he's working on, I will allocate his time to those projects. Or to those funds as well. But legislative, so council costs, executive costs, which would be the mayor and myself, and all legal costs that are for general legal counsel are distributed based on agenda items. So, because that's kind of like the running and operating of the city. So whatever council talks about at the end of the year, I will take all of those agenda items, allocate them based on the funds that they go to, and divide up the costs for that. For finance and central services, so HR would be a central service. Those costs are distributed based on the number of financial transactions. And so, so I run a report basically out of the system and it goes based off of the number of checks cut and the number of, and where they were cut to, out of which funds, as well as, you know, if we have to do any transfers, and allocate it that way. And so then, and those are done at the end of the year based on actual costs. And then other allocations, you know, audit costs, insurance costs, phone costs, and everything else are based off of what's provided, what departments does it hit, and how it should be allocated. So that's it for the financial policies. Are there any questions?
Like drinking out of the fire hose.
I know. I think, what I wanted to kind of get across is when you look at the strategy of financial health, we have the guardrails for it, and the city, despite what people feel with their water and sewer bills, the city is financially healthy. And it's because of the astronomical cost of the infrastructure improvements that we've had to bear that makes the sewer rates what they are.
Right.
And I can include more of the analysis as far as what our tax rate is compared to others in the state. I mean, even the sales tax, we're at 7.7. I think the only county with a rate of 7.5 that's left in the state is Clickitat County,
And let's say it's 8.7 in Vancouver.
right?
I'll take 5.
It's 8.7 downtown.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I saw it today.
Well, thank you, because having experienced the sheriff's office budget for 13 years, I know what it takes to move all of those things back and forth in order to make sure you're pulling them from the right funds, so
and so
thank
thi-
you for all that hard work.
Yeah, and so these again are the guidelines for what staff brings to council. So again, if we're proposing rate changes or fee changes, it's because of this policy and we're trying to, again, recoup our costs.
Right.
And we try to make sure that we do it in a prudent manner and we do it we review it on a regular basis because it's not good to have a high jump. So we want to make sure that we do it on a regular basis to make sure that we're on top of things. Mhm.
Can you refresh my memory? There was one section there where we were talking about that if you change, where you could use general revenue, the sewer funds, where if you switch something that enables, it was per policy, and you know what I'm talking
I
about?
do,
can't-
yeah.
What page was that on, what number? And I didn't get it written down when we were going over it. I remember reading it, but I can't,
So
when I
believe
go
it was
to look
under-
for it
was
now, I
under
can't find-
Debt,
yeah.
yeah, so it was debt policies, so it was on page 10.
Okay, I found that.
And
Yeah,
it's
but-
number 3, so
Oh, okay.
general obligation debt will not be used for self-supporting enterprise activity.
Okay, and the way that's being interpreted, and accurately so, is that's why you were gonna go out and like put in new sewer lines and stuff, you could not incur general obligation debt. So explain that,
So you wouldn't run a general obligation bond
okay, in order to build,
in order to build the sewer system.
It would have to be a
All
specific
of-
bond, right?
but,
So the sewer systems that we have now, so the debt that we have now, so USDA, that's a revenue bond that we have. So it's based off of the revenue, so it's based off our utility rates.
okay, because
we bring
we're
in.
considering, those would be considering self-supporting enterprise activities, or conceivably could be. So I'm not suggesting this discussion for now or at any time, because I think about it as one person, but that is an internal policy
Mhm.
that we could change someday if we wanted to figure out, if we thought financially we were in good enough shape in other areas to where we could incur debt that would then could help extend sewer lines or whatever, if I'm reading.
So
this correctly.
general obligation debt, right, so that is, basically putting it on the backs of the property owners instead of on the ratepayers.
Right, so, okay.
Mhm.
I'm not suggesting that, but it isn't,
Well, it was
A
something
big-
that was discussed during the committee,
Discussed.
yeah.
Right.
One of the things, if the city were to go out to bond. So if we wanted to float a general obligation bond. The rates for a general obligation bond are much higher than what we would get for the competitive low interest loans that we received.
Mhm.
So, for example, the USDA loan, I think is maybe 2%. And I think the recent Public Works Board loan that we got is around 3 something. So all of these are less than 4, definitely less than 6, which is what the latest rate is for the bond market.
Mhm.
So every loan that we have is a low interest loan. Granted, it's competitive to get them. But you save money in the long run because it's lower interest. And we're talking, 30 to 40 years of interest that you're saving. So, yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay.
Next up is our 30-minute video.
Yeah.
Not sure.
This- there was only a few items. This is where I was,
This is where I was-
So I do want to address something, so this is on Open Public Meetings Act and the Public Records Act, and yesterday there was an issue with regards to the meeting that took place and
Oh,
public
right.
comment, and so I just want to make sure that everyone understands sort of the reason behind that Open Public Meetings Act and why we couldn't do public comment yesterday. It wasn't on our agenda. If that is something that council intended to have done, then it needed to be on the agenda that public comment was going to be taken, because then people don't show up. Not like,
Right.
some people didn't show up because public comment wasn't on the agenda.
Okay,
Whereas
no,
on
yeah,
a
I got
regular
that.
meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you're the one that suggested.
I know I asked, but
comment, so-
I understood your answer.
Right.
Okay,
When
but you also attended this session on special meetings, and so that's why I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure that you really understand why the Open Public Meetings Act is important and what it actually means when we have special meetings.
Plus,
I did watch the.
plus
video.
that was actually under the control of the county.
That was the
And-
other
and
thing.
So
as well.
we really
Right.
had no control.
They were like, point of
Unless,
order.
unless we had made a request to them
Right.
to include that,
Right,
in their agenda.
It was their meeting.
It wasn't,
Right.
yeah, right.
Oh, so
Right.
before you take off,
Okay,
I would entertain a motion from one of you to approve the vouchers.
okay.
I would move to approve the vouchers as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank Pat.
See ya,
Thank
Pat.
you. Sorry.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then I did watch that video, so, doesn't mean I have every little bit of. it.
right, no, but that's
Yeah.
but that's
Yeah, I
also
know.
part of the reason why we're doing it as a group, so that I can go through those examples and
Yeah.
kind of state sort of
Yeah.
why we do things the way we do.
Oh, no.
You gotta take the test before you leave. though.
So.
This
I-
would make
You
down has
decide.
failed.
I just
You
think
watched
it should,
that, yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Just saying you
Yeah.
watched.
No, just, yeah.
All right, and so next, so Pat, have a good night and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, and thanks for letting me. Okay, do I?
See you
on
again
both?
next week.
And-
Yes, if you watch the video, yeah.
Yes. Okay. I put my name.
So Vancouver has three, in Vancouver, there's three sets of,
22nd.
there's an area that's 8.5, 8.6, and 8.7. Based
For
on
eight.
different,
Where's the 22nd?
whatever it is.
Today is the 22nd.
Because,
yes.
and downtown next to, because I work in Clark County, so downtown,
Thank you.
the main, the jail and the medical center and all that,
Yeah,
that's
that's
in seven.
Yes, it does,
Okay.
yeah.
You get farther north, it's like, there's a way cut out, 8.5, and then other parts of grade 6. So.
Thanks,
like,
Scott.
I don't even deal with that, I just know, the only reason I know is because I don't pay bills, so I see the invoices and the auditor's office tells me, hey, make sure
Get the right.
this is the
percentage.
amount you need to put on there.
I hate
So-
diuretics.
That's the only reason that I have any idea, I wouldn't have. But I saw an invoice. Literally.
I thought I was doing fine
logged
without
on
it.
today, because it went out,
I looked at- I looked
it
at
went
that.
up one, within the last year.
Okay. Right. I just just Googled it. I
Mm.
was looking at it.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Watch
It's
the video.
weird,
Mark.
they do that, where like, where my building is, where I work, is different. Than the downtown, like I'm in public health and we're in the VA building. Right off of 14,
Mhm.
and that's different. Amount, I think we're 8.6 and it's 8.7 down at the courthouse.
Interesting. So just down at the downtown area.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's more than just that, but I know that one, and then there's a place called Heritage Farms where we send some things and do some work. And Heritage Farms is not the same as my office. And so if I have something shipped to me, we pay ours. If I have it shipped to Heritage Farms, we pay theirs. So it's different based on where the delivery location is. So.
So we're gonna turn it over now to Gig Harbor, to Adrian Urquhart Winder with Foster Garvey. Adrian, I'm gonna let you go ahead and take it away with our OPMA training.
Good morning, everyone. As Deanna said, I'm Adrienne Winder, and I'm an attorney at Foster Garvey. And if there's anything scarier than finance or ethics, it's public records and open public meetings. So you get to hear that from me today. And as Deanna mentioned, these topics are so important and have been such a source of mistakes by elected officials that the state legislature requires you to receive this training. So you have to listen to me. I'm very sorry about that. But we'll go ahead and dive right in. Similar to other presentations, there is a lot of content to cover and only a certain amount of time to do it. But we want to make sure we get through everything. So I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so the Open Public Meetings Act. This is simply the concept that when you have a meeting on the city council, it needs to be open to the public unless you have a specific exception. So this applies to all meetings of a governing body. And as you probably can guess, the city council is a governing body of the city. What you might not know is that it can also apply to committees of the city. And that's going to apply in certain circumstances, such as if you have a quorum of council members that are sitting on a particular committee, or if that committee has been delegated responsibility from the council to make decisions on behalf of the council. So just be aware that simply because you're sitting on a committee of that the city council has created, it might mean that you're still subject to the OPMA. As a matter of course, a lot of cities open things like committees open to the public anyway, so that it's not a concern, but just something to be mindful of. I'll go through this slide very quickly because it essentially covers what I just talked about, which is when you have committees, you need to look at certain factors to see if they're covered by the OPMA. But again, a lot of committees are already open to the public and can be as a policy choice, even if it's not required. Okay, so what is a meeting? And I think this is where it can get a little bit confusing because a meeting is any meeting where action is taken. And action is very broad. It's the transaction of the official business of the city, and it includes things like not only receiving testimony, but your deliberations, discussing things, considering things, reviewing things, evaluating things, and of course, taking final action on things, which is your traditional vote yay or nay. So there are lots of examples of what qualify as meetings under the under the OPMA. Some of those could be business meetings. They might be workshops, study sessions, committee meetings, retreats. All of these things can qualify as a meeting under the OPMA. And so don't let a more traditional form of the word meeting confuse you about when the OPMA might apply. If you're working with your fellow city council members on a topic of city business, you are having a meeting. It doesn't matter if you're standing in City Hall and just having a conversation over a cup of coffee. If there is a quorum of you, that is a meeting under the OPMA. So, did we just have a meeting? Meetings can take place in person. They can take place on the phone, email, text. What about when you travel together? Like when you go to a conference, that can be a meeting. If you are traveling together and you are sure that you are not going to talk about city business, then maybe you're okay under the OPMA. But safest course is that your city is going to send out a public notice that says, hey, members of our city council are traveling to this conference at this location. Typically, people don't follow you there, but it's important that they know that you're there. So if they want to follow you, they can. If you're having informal discussions, they need to be limited to an exchange of information. So that might be something like FYI, here are these materials. Don't reply back to those types of communications. Otherwise, then you're engaging in a discussion. Straw polls. These can become trouble, in particular in executive session, which is a portion of a meeting that is closed to the public.
So informal discussions, the exchange of information. she says, don't respond to those. I think she's talking about emails, correct?
Right, so don't reply all. That's why I send things to BCC a majority of the time.
Okay,
Mhm.
so, but can we in turn send something out to all of our council members? Not expecting a
Response.
reply. Information wise,
So the way that I would like, and she might go into it more, but the way that it has been done is you provide it to me, I send it out.
okay. Okay. All right.
I'll ask you a question about that later.
Okay.
Public. If you're in executive session, you don't want to be doing things like, oh, I think I'm going to vote for this. And somebody says, yeah, me too. Okay, how are we looking? Don't do things like that. That's considered basically taking a vote. Something like that needs to actually occur in public and should really be your vote taking action in a public.
So. With Pat saying yesterday in that meeting that he's not in favor of it and he will not vote.
Mhm.
was
That's
that- is that
different.
in
She was,
violation of that?
she was talking about if you're in executive session.
Oh, okay,
We were in a
Right.
meeting.
Yeah, that was in the open meeting.
and that's okay.
And because it was taking place at a publicly advertised
Got it.
open meeting, right?
Thank you.
public
Just trying to
forum.
Right.
Yeah.
keep them clear.
Right.
Serial communications. These can also be a point where things get tricky. You can have a chain of communications. It might be email, it might be text, where you are having a back and forth. And so they call that a serial communication or a chain meeting. And that's been the subject of a few different cases under Washington law that a violation of the OPMA has occurred. So some examples and ways to avoid these issues so that you don't get tripped up. No reply all when there are other council members on that email thread. You may see your city manager communicating with you where your name's in a BCC line. That is intentional. That is so that you cannot reply to all. Because many of us have made that mistake or seen others make that mistake where they intended to reply to one person and they replied to everyone. So using things like BCC is actually a helpful way if, for example, a city manager wants to convey information to the whole council, but again, the mere exchange of information, but not cause a meeting to occur. Group text threads are another pitfall. Don't get involved in those. Phone trees may be less common now with newer technology, but the concept is still the same. If council member A calls council member B and they talk about something and council member B then starts calling council member C and say, hey, I talked to council member A, that's a serial communication that can constitute a meeting in violation of the OPMA. Another area of warning that is newer is things like Google Docs and tools that are used for group editing of documents. That can be tricky because if you as a council member start editing a document, leave your comments on it, and then that goes to another council member, they see your comments and then they add their own comments, you can see how this can quickly devolve into what's a meeting within the bounds of the OPMA. And social media. If you have a Facebook page for your city and you start commenting on it and then other council members start replying to your comments, it can create an issue. Now, you're probably thinking, but isn't that open to the public? It's a public Facebook page. Here's why it's a problem.
So that goes for either city or personal social media. Correct?
You have no outside life now.
Well, I
It's not
know that.
separate.
I've known that for years.
Yeah.
Nothing is private when you enter the public sector. Yeah.
There's actually coming up through AWC or MRSC, I forget which one, something about like social media 101 as well for electeds.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter. You're now Dave Cox council member. You're not Dave Cox, retired Joe Blow, you know.
Yeah. Everything you do.
You have to notice a meeting in advance. You can't just have a meeting. There are different types of meetings in a city. You're going to have your quote unquote regular meeting, and that's established generally by an ordinance that says we meet on the second and fourth Tuesdays of every month. It's a meeting that the public can count on is going to occur. They can certainly be canceled, and that's fine, but it's sort of the regular routine pattern of meetings that your city has established. If it's not a regular meeting, it's known as a special meeting. A special meeting is any other type of meeting. It could be that trip to that conference to discuss. It could be, this new topic came up and we need to have a meeting to talk about it. So we're going to notice a special meeting. It doesn't have to be limited to one topic. It can be a whole number of topics. When you do a special meeting, you need to send out a notice at least 24 hours in advance, and that notice includes an agenda of what you're going to talk about. When you go to that meeting, you can only take final action, that final vote, yes, no, on a particular topic for something that is on your agenda. So it doesn't mean you can't talk about anything that wasn't on the agenda. Sometimes things pop up last minute, but do not take final action on anything that wasn't on the agenda. I'll note too that your city clerk will post agendas for your regular meetings as well. It doesn't mean that you can't deviate from those things, but it's to help guide the public so that, they see, oh, you're talking about this project. I care about that. I want to be at that meeting. When the public finds out that some major topic was discussed at a meeting and they didn't know about it, that's when you start getting people upset. So that's what agendas and notices are for. And of course,
Just a quick question. So I'm assuming that council members can't put a motion on the floor for something that to vote on. It would have to be something that we to think about or talk about, discuss and vote at a future meeting.
You're talking about a regular meeting or special meeting?
So regular meetings, we can adjust the agenda. But special meeting, we can't.
Doesn't it be specifically noted?
Has to be
If someone wants to come and witness the discussion and the vote, isn't that kind of
Well, so,
the gist of it?
yeah, I've always gone with, because sometimes I'll add things within 24 hours to the agenda because there's something that comes up for a construction project or something. And so the way that I've understood it is that your regular meetings more or less are fair game. Try not to add controversial things last minute. That's not the intent. It's more
Housekeeping.
urgent items or
Right.
housekeeping
Well,
items.
if something
Right,
needs to
well,
be extended or.
we only meet once a month.
Yeah.
If we met every other week or twice a month, like it'd be a different story. But only meeting once a month. Again, we try to,
So if it's a controversial item, you'd want to put something on the floor to put on a future agenda.
Mhm.
right,
Yeah, and we've discussed stuff, and then next month is when we're gonna vote on whatever that thing is. It's time to.
Which is what caused the hiccup last meeting.
Right.
Because we changed our format.
Yeah.
and then, so the issues for discussion, kind of like at the end of every agenda are also kind of where you can bring that up. So and sometimes too, though, when you're talking, when there's something on the agenda for discussion, it doesn't mean that you can't have action on it.
Right.
That item is still there, you're discussing it, things happen. I see that you can have a motion for it, but staff wouldn't be prepared with an agenda or a resolution or an ordinance right then and there. It just,
Yeah, those are business items that are on the agenda. I was thinking of something would be novel, something that wasn't actually on the agenda for that.
Oh, like if I brought up something totally not on the agenda, not on anyone's radar, I brought it up. That wouldn't be something we would vote on at that, like I guess I technically.
well, no, so the way that it would happen is if when we go to, not consent agenda. What's the part of the meeting?
It's right at the very end.
No,
Yeah.
the beginning part of the meeting where you approve the agenda.
Oh,
That, no, you approve changes to the agenda.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
You'd add-
Changes to the agenda, so you would add
an
that
item to it.
then,
Okay.
right.
and
then
then
we
to
can
discuss, and
it.
then you can discuss it and, or
And if
take
there is something
action.
that needs to-
Right, but you would add it at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay.
And again, like, depending on how public comment goes, I don't know if things have been added because of public, because something's been brought up from the public also. But it all depends. There's so much.
Well, and then the other part is depending on, some prefer to do more than just cursory research.
Right.
And want some.
All depending
relation.
on what it is we're talking about too.
So that's where the end of the agenda where it talks about what would you like to see on the next agenda, yes.
Of course, the point of the OPMA is to give notice to the public so that they can watch their government at work and they can attend if they want to attend. There will be meeting minutes taken for every meeting. There's no specific format for that. It's becoming more and more commonplace to record meetings, either audio or also sometimes with video. And some very recent amendments to the OPMA have expressly encouraged this, and they encourage cities to post those meetings online for at least 6 months, which is helpful so that people don't have to bother the city clerk with a records request and that they know what's going on. Is it required? No. So if the meeting's not recorded, the agenda and those meeting minutes are going to be sort of the official record of what happened at that meeting.
One thing I also want to say, I don't know that it would be mentioned in this, but a recent change to state law too is that you must have public comment at every meeting where final action is being taken. So that is why I had public comment at this meeting, was because final action was being taken on a couple of resolutions and contracts. So again, that's a recent change that I don't know that she'll address.
Mhm.
But, so public comment wasn't required last night because there was no final action. It was just a discussion.
Right.
But where final action is taken, public comment is required, not necessarily a public hearing, but you just have to allow for public comment. So again, it's a little bit of a nuance, but yeah.
Okay, executive session. So this will become a regular for you all, is sitting on a city council. This is the portion of the meeting where the public can actually be excluded. So typical reasons for having an executive session, I would say the most common is to talk about legal risk. If you think about the fact that as council members, you can't meet as a quorum with the public, if you want to talk to your lawyer as a city, how do you do that? You do it in an executive session. Some other specific examples are if you're looking at buying or selling a piece of property. A big reason for that is because public knowledge of those types of acquisitions can lead to inflated or decreased prices. And it's very important that any criteria for an exemption. So for example, if you're looking to sell real estate, there will be a caveat in there about, is it likely to cause a decrease in price or an impact on the price? You can also evaluate charges against a public officer or an employee, or you can review employee performance. So for example, you can review the performance of the city manager in executive session, and that's considered okay. Very key point, final action has to be taken in public. Again, with the straw polls, things like that, it's your opportunity to talk about the specific issues you're allowed to talk about, but then you need to go do your final discussions and take your vote in public. All right. Also a key point, information learned in executive session. Do not share this. Executive session is intended to be a private meeting of the city council. And actually disclosing what you're talking about in executive session is a violation of the code of ethics for municipal officers. So there are statutes that you would be violating if you share information. It can also be considered a misdemeanor offense and official misconduct. So please do not share what you learn in executive session. Know that if you are a city and you have someone on your council or otherwise who is not abiding by that, you can actually take legal action to stop them from doing that. Executive session reminders. This is just some quick procedural points. The presiding officer is going to announce that you're going into executive session and state the general purpose of why. So we're going into executive session to discuss legal risk. You will also say, the presiding officer will say when the session will end. And if you go over that time, then someone has to go back out and let the public know that, oh, we need an extra 15 minutes. Interesting point, if you finish early in executive session, you can't start your meeting until that time you told the public you would start. So if you say, we're going into executive session for an hour and you finish at 45 minutes, you don't go back in until an hour has passed. Otherwise, again, public says you were supposed to be gone an hour. You came back 15 minutes early and started talking. So you can kind of see these things start to become, more obvious about, oh, okay, that makes sense why we would do that. People in executive session are going to be obviously you as council members, other people who are invited to participate because they're necessary to that discussion. And if you're talking about legal risk or litigation, you need to have your lawyer there. Otherwise, that's going to be kind of strange that you're having a legal risk discussion without your lawyer. Public records reminder, there is no exemption for records just because they were used or created in executive session. So if you take notes of your executive session, that creates problems for your public records officer. Or if there's agendas that are passed around, or if there's materials that are distributed, there's not a catch-all exemption for, oh, that was used in an executive session. So be thoughtful about notes, records, and things that you take. It's better to avoid that if possible.
What about,
And some final
yeah.
executive session reminders.
So what about,
All the pictures. of-
video presentations, PowerPoint presentations, those kinds of things? Would those be subject to public records requests then?
So what I've seen happen in the past is something is done in executive session and then it's collected after the executive session, and any documents for that executive session are still maintained that confidentiality, so they're typically noted. I think if they are referenced outside of that executive session, that is when
Opens them up to.
it opens them up to public records. So if your city attorney is preparing, I mean, that's pretty much what it is like your attorney is preparing a presentation for you to be discussed in executive session, then that is not subject to disclosure.
I was thinking about all the pictures that were passed out.
So
the pictures that were passed
So
out-
wait, we can't
Careful.
talk about anything.
No,
That's what I'm getting at.
oh, well,
That's what I'm getting at.
Okay,
So those are not subject to records requests if they're only distributed and used in the executive session.
Okay.
So that's kind of a nuance. If it is only in the executive session, and if it is outside and not outside of like attorney-client privilege.
so this is just a general statement, in general. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter.
So if the city receives information
Mhm,
that is subject to public records requests,
mhm,
we provide it.
fair enough. And things that are already in the public record can be shared during that, and it doesn't,
Right. If we received it in a way that was outside of a protected process.
right,
That.
then it already would have been available to public record to us
Okay,
anyway.
Yes, right,
That was
right,
where I was
yes,
going.
yes. But if it is, attorney-client privilege from the get-go
Then
and
it's-
discussed
Yeah.
only in the executive session, then it
is-
remains that attorney-client privilege.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So. Is that clear as mud?
Hmm.
The executive session is for a very specific purpose, and the courts are going to provide the narrowest construction possible. I've put a point here to the Columbia River Keepers versus Port of Vancouver case, where the court looked at the sale or lease of real estate. And it had to do with looking at the price at which you would sell or lease. The Port of Vancouver was having meetings that talked about a lot more than price. They were talking about deal terms, they were talking about context, and the court said, no, that is not what the executive session is for. You need to talk about context in the public meeting first, then you can go to executive session, talk specifically about price, then you can come back out into public session, and if it's the appropriate time, you can take your vote or move until, the next meeting where this issue might come up. A very key point that I want you all to remember on executive session is that it's everyone's job to help ensure that you comply with these rules. If you think the topic is veering too far off course, you're getting too much into context and not about what the statute is about, or it's sounding like people are starting to kind of vote on things, raise your hand and say something. It's important to create a culture that it's okay to speak up. This kind of stuff happens naturally as part of discussion. It's usually not because someone is trying to create an OPMA violation. It's that you're involved in a discussion and sometimes things can start going astray. And so in some cases, I've audited executive sessions before, and I'll hear someone speak up and go, okay, I think we're starting to get a little off topic, so let's bring it back to this. And that's what you need to be doing. Your city attorney will help monitor that as well if they are at your executive sessions, but it's everyone's job to do it. So don't be afraid to say something and help keep everyone on course to avoid a violation. Okay, public attendance at meetings. This is new, that you actually need to have a physical location for people to be there at your meeting. Interestingly, you don't have to be there. You can still be remote. And so you could literally have a phone in the middle of a room that the public can come and listen in that way, or you can have it projected up on a screen. But you do have to have a physical location unless there's an emergency. And the legislature broadened what can be an emergency. It basically is if it's not safe to have a meeting, you cannot not safe to have a meeting in public together. You don't have to, and you follow the procedures to take care of that. There are no conditions on attendance. You can't make attendees at a public meeting register their name or complete a questionnaire. You can do registering name for public comment, however. But you can place some reasonable conditions for health and safety. So one that's come up more frequently in recent years is masking. Can you require that attendees wear a mask at your meeting if we're at another COVID spike to help protect the council and staff and members of the public? Yes, you can make that requirement. Okay, public comment. This is going to be a regular course of your life. Public comment is now required at every regular meeting. It didn't used to actually be required, even though most agencies would have it anyway. It's now required. It is at regular meetings. It's not required for special meetings, but it is recommended at your special meetings too. OPMA doesn't say when public comment has to occur. I've seen it held all sorts of different ways. A lot of times there'll be a section at the beginning of the meeting where the public can address. And it can be written comment instead of oral comment. So if you do that, you just need to let the public know when the comments have to be submitted by, and then they need to be distributed to each of you as a council member. You don't have to require public comment during emergencies. And again, reminder that if your committees are subject to the OPMA, so does public comment stuff, although generally speaking, a lot of that is going to be special meetings, but be mindful of the public comment aspect. So managing your meeting. Your meeting is what's called a limited public forum in speech parlance. So what that means is that cities can regulate the time, place, and manner of speech, and you do that through rules of procedure and conduct. Very, very key point is these rules need to be viewpoint neutral. If you're going to allow speech on a particular topic, you can't let one person who's in favor of something you like speak and then shoo off somebody who disagrees with you. First Amendment considerations are very important during public comment. I will just warn you, develop a thick skin. If people are criticizing you, commenting, calling you out by name, as long as they're not being really, really horrible about it, you just want to let them talk and then move on. Oftentimes cities will have, you get 2 minutes for public comment. And if they've exhausted their time, then they need to sit down. And you can't do things like simply just ban hate speech. Unfortunately, it's becoming more and more of a problem in today's day and age. We've had some more aggressive people showing up at meetings, and even people who just like to stir up trouble, that like to appear remotely they're not even from your city. They just want to be difficult. So that's created some new challenges. MRSC has been staying on top of these things and has some great posts about how to help deal with people who are disruptive to your meetings. But you have to actually disrupt a meeting before removal is allowed. That's a really high threshold, and you should treat it that way. As I said, develop a thick skin, give them their 2 minutes, and then move on to the next commenter. You don't need to respond. Just let them say what they're going to say. It's just easier than dealing with a claim or a lawsuit later that someone's free speech rights were violated. So with respect to that, you can limit comments to particular subject matter. For example, things that are on the agenda. If you don't have to, it's just easier to just allow public comment. Then that way people get their words in, and you don't run into people complaining that their First Amendment rights have been violated. Remote meetings have some unique pros and cons. From a con perspective, like I mentioned, you may get the stray person who just appears in your meeting to be difficult and isn't even a constituent, but you can more easily remove them if they're causing problems. If someone's going over their time, you can give them a warning and then press mute. Or you can even disconnect them if you need to. I would prefer you just use the mute button if possible. And there are some, again, potential limitations you can use. I would not use these unless you really have a problem that needs to be addressed. And again, MRSC is a great resource if you need help with something like this. Okay, so what if you violate the OPMA? Sometimes it happens. There is a way to cure that. For example, if the notice wasn't proper, then unfortunately the things that you did at that meeting are void. So what do? You send out a fresh notice and you have the meeting again. You can't just summarily approve of things. You need to have the discussion, the debate, allow opposing people to say their piece. But that can cure an OPMA violation. But what if you don't cure? What if somebody sues the city for an OPMA violation? As long as it's unintentional, then the result is that the action is nullified. You are responsible for that person's attorney's fees for bringing the lawsuit. So there is a cost involved there. But if you knowingly violate the OPMA, that's actually personal liability on you as a council member. First violation's a $500 fine. After that, it's $1,000. And also, if you fail to cure things, you run the risk of nullifying future actions, because if that earlier action was the basis for future actions taken, you can kind of create a domino effect. So it's important that if you catch that the OPMA was violated, it's best to just own up to that and fix it. A lot of these are fixable. And this is why this training is required, because most people violate the OPMA on accident. And so it's just knowing this new world, if you're new to public service or government service that you're in, that things need to be done in public. All right, so turning now to the Public Records Act. This is also going to affect you every day. So let's see. All right. Public Records Act was initially an initiative measure, actually, fun fact, and then became part of our law back in 1972. So it's been around for a while. Come on. There we go. Okay. You remember this thing called the copying machine? It seems like they're getting more and more obsolete. So what's the point of the Public Records Act? Agencies have to make all of their public records available for inspection and copying unless there's an exemption. So what is a public record? Oh, I didn't realize these were all on little things. Okay, so I'm gonna go through these real quick. I'll just bring them all up and then talk through them. Come on, clicker. Okay. All right, so there's 3 elements. Remember, public record is broadly defined. The first piece is any writing. I'm going to tell you right now that anything that you can possibly conceive of, it's a writing. I know it may seem weird that, well, but it's just data. No, it's a writing. It's all a writing. If you look at the definition of writing in the PRA, you would be shocked the things that they come up with that is a writing. A photograph, that's a writing. It's, again, kind of a strange misnomer to call it a writing, I think, for some people, but just know you're never going to avoid it being a public record because it's not a writing. That's just not something you're going to see. The 2 things that it usually hinges on is it needs to relate to the conduct of government or the performance of a government or proprietary function, and it needs to be prepared, owned, used, or retained by the city. I refer to that and others do as the POUR test, so that you remember all the pieces: prepared, owned, used, and retained. You as city council members, things that you create, things that you use, things that you have, it's a record of the city. It's not just it's not your record. It's the city's record. Okay, responding to public records requests. Records requests need to be responded to promptly, and this is very important. At least an initial response needs to be sent within 5 business days. So it's typically a week unless there's a holiday. You have to provide the records, provide an estimate of time if you need more time, seek clarification, or you can deny it. Bigger requests are usually produced in what's called installments, so you send out chunks as they're available. Exemptions and exemptions and exemption logs. Sometimes material in records is exempt. So for example, if it's an employment related record, there's an exemption that protects your residential address, your personal email, your personal phone number. There are lots of exemptions that can apply, and I'll cover some of these that you might care more about than others. And so if the record can be redacted to make it releasable, that's the preference. So for example, if you can de-identify the record, say by removing a name from it, then release the rest of the information. That's what the Public Records Act will want you to do. And you also have to explain how the exemptions apply. Okay, so some general principles to remember.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's why we do this as a group.
Okay, if I'm making PDFs of documents that are being provided, like our agenda packets and things like those, are those technically considered public records?
Yes, however, the city keeps them. So
Nobody's gonna be asking for my laptop and wanting to see them.
Can't say
Not-
never.
what?
Can't say never.
Right, can't say never.
Or can.
But the way that it would work though is if you download the documents and then make notes on the documents and keep those notes, that can be a record.
Or keep that document.
And well, yeah, but
Well, but
but I
if
think
it's
like,
done, they
but
already
if,
have.
but if he's altered it, that's what I'm getting at, like,
It's alteration.
we keep the document, so you just say, talk to the city, but if you've altered it, that's where it becomes.
Okay.
And so,
Just because you have documents that you've downloaded from the city to your computer, that doesn't make them public information. The public information is at the city. It's not on your computer.
but the difference is if you've modified.
If you
Yes,
modify, it,
that's,
then
then
it
it
becomes,
becomes, yeah, so.
yeah.
It's a nuance, and that's why we try to encourage people to use the cloud and the Google Docs and Google, because that's something that's more easily extracted, especially if you're using your city account. But there is a potential for your computer or electronics to be confiscated if there's a public records request and they don't feel like it happened at the PUD.
Could there is, say any, Liana could ask all of us, any communication regarding this matter between these parties, please provide the evidence of these communications. And if the person that has requested that does not feel that you have done your due diligence or is pretty sure that you're holding back, that's when we start working and pulling your electronics in for further investigation.
And so sometimes what happens is if I get a request from someone and it's for, emails, I have access to Google Vault and I do a search for email communications, and most of the time you never know. Because again, I have that data, but if it's, sometimes if it spills into other communications, then I may, and I have in the past, had to ask council members for text message threads or other communications related to that. Sometimes I would engage RadComp, and the council member could say, give access to our IT provider to extract that data through that computer to search the records. And then that third party provider would do that search for those records.
You said if I put it in the Google Drive, and if anybody can access, maybe.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I think the part of that is that it's something that is discoverable through a records search that Liana would perform. Right, so doesn't mean that someone's gonna be able to be tracking their muddy footprints through your document, but because it's a city property, Liana does have access to it and can provide that document as discovered.
You can't distinguish amongst requesters. There may be requesters that you can't stand. That every place has their people. But you can't distinguish against them. You need to be treating everyone the same with respect to public records. There are some exceptions. For example, if an employee wants to look at their file, they have a special statutory right to look at their personnel file. Why they are requesting records is not relevant. This comes up all the time. People get frustrated. They're like, why? Why is this person requesting records? Doesn't matter. They don't have to have a reason. We have to still respond to it. They don't have to use a special form. You can have your form and hope that they use it. But if they walk up to you at a city council meeting and say, I would like a copy of the city's budget, they just made a public records request to you. So you need to be on the lookout for these things. Another issue, overbroad requests. They can issue a request that covers years worth of material. And unfortunately, the city, you're still going to have to respond. It may take a lot of time. It may take a lot of resources. But if your question is, well, can't we make them narrow it? No, you cannot. You can try to clarify. Your records officer may try to work with them, but there's only so much you can do. If someone wants to send you a very broad records request, that is within their rights under the PRA. PRA covers requests for records, not information. So they need to be looking for a specific record. And it is actually in the statute that we provide the fullest assistance to requesters. So we need to try to help them get what they're looking for. So again, with the hidden requests, watch out for these. If you get a request, whether it's in an email form or someone talks to you after a meeting or they submit a comment card, you must immediately get that information to your public records officer. Most of the time, that's going to be your city clerk. You will quickly learn who your public records officer is, and they, depending on the size of your city, they may have others working for them and with them to process PRA requests. But you need to get that in the right hands, because if it's not responded to within 5 days, 5 business days, it's a PRA violation. You don't want to put your city in that position. So if you don't know, just give it to the public records officer just to be sure. The public records officer.
And that's 5 days from when you individually receive it, not when you give it to the city.
Correct.
So if you get it on a Friday afternoon and you wait until Monday or Tuesday to get it to the city, you just wasted some time.
It's business days too, so, but yes, yeah.
officer is trained in a lot of detail how to respond to these, and they'll know what needs to happen. Even if it's that, well, that's not actually a PRA request, but thank you for giving it to me. That's the approach you
Yeah.
want to take.
Just for it.
Speaking of your public records officer, I want you to think of Jerry Maguire, Tom Cruise, whoever you prefer. Help me help you. Your public records officer needs to help the requester. Please help your public records officer. They work very hard. Public records requests can be very frustrating and very tedious. They will ask you for information. They will ask you where records are located. They will also help you if you need help. Tell them you need help. But please, please work with them, because the ramifications for violating the PRA affect your city. So if any one person is being problematic, it really can create a financial obligation on the part of the city and liability that you want to avoid. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about privacy, because I'm sure that this is near and dear to all of your hearts. If you're coming from a more private sector life, you just leave all of that privacy behind. You are subject to greater transparency and scrutiny as a public officer. So there's no general right to privacy under the PRA. You can't just say, oh, but it violates my right to privacy. There are certain things like potential constitutional interests that might be implicated, but that's not generally what is ever, there are cases that talk about that, but usually a city's not going to rely on that. Again, redaction often resolves these issues, even if someone can figure out that the record's about you. That's really frustrating for people because oftentimes records requests come from people who know things already. And so they're looking for something specific. They already know who's involved. And so the city can redact your name and you can be very uncomfortable that this information is being released. But from the court's perspective, it's de-identified. We can't control what the requester knows or does not know. And so unfortunately, your hands are sort of tied on that front. Know that you might get a third-party notice from your public records officer. Those are optional unless it's required by statute. Most of the time they're sent out on an optional basis. And oftentimes that happens because there is something that's sensitive in the records. Maybe you were talking about your children or health issues or personal things in an email that came up and they say, hey, this is going to get released. You've got 10 days to go get a court injunction if you want us to not release it. Unfortunately, that's tough on you. That's tough on employees that get the same kind of notices. But just don't be surprised if you receive those. Respond promptly if you receive them, and just be aware that the clerk probably doesn't enjoy having to release sensitive information any more than you do, but the law says what it says on these issues. Okay, so there are certain PRA exemptions that do apply to the extent it would violate a person's right to privacy. This is a very high standard, high standard. Look at that blue language in the bottom where it says it is not enough that disclosure may cause embarrassment to you or others. That is in a statute. If it makes you uncomfortable, if it's embarrassing, the court is very sorry, I'm sure, but they're not going to prevent it from being released. So think about these principles when you create records. If you don't want people to know things about your personal life, like the names of your children or that you had to take one of them to the doctor, don't talk about it in a public record. Don't write it in a public record. It creates uncomfortable situations for the records officer and it overcomplicates the process. The standard for privacy is highly offensive to a reasonable person and not of legitimate concern to the public. A lot of things are going to fail for its legitimate concern to the public. Things like how dollars are spent, items like that will always get released. Information about how a city manager is performing, things like that. And it has to meet both of these tests. Highly offensive, you've got to think really highly offensive. One of the standards that's used as one of the key cases has been like cases where a teacher is accused of having sexual misconduct with a student and they didn't do it. And so having their name attached to that, I mean, that has very serious consequences. So you're talking about that level of highly offensive. Okay, I'm running short on time, surprise, surprise. So I'm going to speed through some of these, but they're no less important. Separate your city business from your personal life, please. Your city likely has policies that say use city email accounts. Please use city email accounts. Don't use personal emails. If you're given a city phone, use your city phone. Don't text on your personal phone. The reason for this is because public records are public records. It doesn't matter if they're located on your laptop, on your personal cell phone, or anywhere else that you might consider private. These records belong to ultimately the state of Washington. You don't have a privacy interest in public records. There are several cases now that emphasize this and say, too bad, you have to search those devices. So please, if you care about these things, and some people don't, they're very open book and they're like, take my personal phone and search it. I'm not hiding anything. Most people in my experience are not like that, and they don't like people looking at their things. So the burden is going to be on you to have to search your personal devices if you're using them. Sometimes cities don't have the budget, or you're getting a stipend or things like that. So just do what you can. If you're using a personal email because you don't, I think pretty much all cities have email domains for their council members. In some of the smaller agencies I work with, sometimes they kind of have to use personal email. Then keep separate folders, keep things organized so that you can say, this is my practice, here's my things. Just know that you are not going to hide a public record by keeping it on a personal device. You're just creating difficulties for yourself and your city. All right, this is just the Nissen case. This is the Pierce County prosecutor who was texting on a personal phone. The court said, search your personal phone and hand those texts over. A quick retention note, which we also need to cover, turn off your auto delete for texts. Some phones have provisions that allow them to roll off after a certain period of time. I would disable that because there are, as we'll talk about, retention requirements. You don't want things being deleted on accident. That's not good. And so turn those off. And then again, if there's a better format, text messages are tough because they're not easy to retain. If you don't need to send a text, then don't put it in an email. An email is on a city server. It can be pulled easily. You don't have to search your phone. It's just better. Text messages are kind of a pain from a public record standpoint. So if you don't have to use it, then don't. Texting like I'm running late to the meeting, fine. That's actually called a transitory message, and you can delete something like that because that's not considered worthy of retention. All right, reminders about electronic records. Electronic records are just like paper records. So if it's an electronic record originally, it needs to stay that way. You can't print it out in paper and delete the original and say, well, but here's a copy. Don't do that. There's metadata in electronic records, and that itself is a public record. Again, reminder about don't overusing reply all. This time it's not because of an OPMA violation. It's because if you copy 10 people on an email and everyone replies all and says, thanks, great, see you later. That's a lot of records to look through. So just be judicious about it. Think twice. Do I really need to reply to this message? And do I really need to reply to everyone on the thread? Okay, so we've pretty much covered this by now. Your city likely has policies on things like using text on cell phones, city devices. Follow them, please. It just makes everyone's lives easier. And using records retention schedules to your advantage. I'm going to use that to, let me talk about enforcement, and then we'll talk about records management. This is where everything really, really hurts. The penalties for PRA violations they can be very, very severe. So cities can be penalized up to $100 per day per record. And there are even in some bad cases where the record was by page, where there was some particularly bad conduct. There are also some individuals that like to wait until 364 days later, right before the statute of limitations on a lawsuit, to file and let you know that the PRA has been violated to maximize that per day penalty. As you can imagine, these can add up very quickly. There's a lot of factors the courts consider on leveraging these, and it's a big deal. The other issue is, of course, attorney's fees and costs. That often is more expensive than the records penalty itself. Again, PRA is liberally construed and the burden is always on you as the city to justify what you did. All right, so quickly, we're going to swing through records management because I'm about out of time here, but I want you to see that is a records retention schedule. It's deceptive because it's just that nice little page, but these are like 400 pages. Talk to your city clerk about records management. There may be policies that you should be following. The point with these is that records retention is also an important requirement. It's in a separate chapter, but remember, public records are the property of the state. If you leave office, you need to deliver your records to your successor, to the clerk, get them saved with the city. Don't take them with you. Creates problems. Again, if you unlawfully destroy a public record, it is a Class C felony. That surprises most people. So I want you to know that even if it may be not super likely you get charged by the prosecutor for that, please don't do it. Okay, records with minimal retention value. These are that transitory record, that term I used before. I have some examples here and you can look at them in your materials. Think of copies of messages. Again, if you're on a thread that's got 10 people on it, probably the sender is the person who needs to maintain that record. And if you don't need it, you can delete it. But you need to look to your agency's policies on how they do records retention. Records retention causes huge issues from a budget standpoint. You can imagine, more server space, more places to save things. We're running out of room. And then when you get a PRA request, the number of records that has to be reviewed gets extraordinary, and it's a humongous burden, let alone the fact that you can't find anything because you have too many records. So it's not a problem to delete records when they're allowed to be deleted. And when they are allowed to be deleted, please delete them. And if they're transitory and you don't need to keep them, then delete them. And remember, and this is, I think, my last point, you can't always delete because everything in the law is, well, but, yes, but. Litigation holds. If you get a letter from your city attorney that says, do not delete any records regarding the dispute with so-and-so, do not delete anything. That can subject your city to serious sanctions by the court, and your city attorney might have his or her head explode. So if you get a litigation hold, keep it all. It doesn't matter how benign, just keep it all. The other is if there's an active records request for it. So if you have a record, even if it's transitory, even if it's junk mail, and a records request has now come in for all of City Council Member X's email from 2023, guess what? That junk mail is now responsive. And if you delete it, you violated the PRA because there's an active PRA request for it. So if you get a hold notification from the clerk that says, we have a public records request for these records, again, don't delete anything. It creates liability. So final points, and we'll stop. Again, learn and follow your city's policies on records management and retention. And this harkens back to the personal device issue. Be prepared to sign a Neeson declaration regarding a personal device. It may be that you say, I attest under penalty of perjury that I do not use my personal device to conduct any city business. But oftentimes you'll still have to do a search and you'll need to attest to that search. So if your public records officer comes to you asking for help in completing one of these declarations, please be prompt and please help them do that. It helps keep you and your city out of trouble.
I think I know the answer to this question. As long as it's something that is sent to council as a whole, city keeps a record of it, right? So I'm thinking of like the emails that we get from our constituents in the community, discussing their concerns and issues, their personal, wants or needs or whatever. There's some of those emails I have just simply deleted. I've read them and deleted them.
And there are some emails that we received that are solely county emails that can be deleted because they don't have anything to do with city business. So yes, and it's okay if you delete them as long as the city was
I'm
Yeah.
just one of the group that got it, so if I delete it, it's not that big of a deal.
Right. Well, that, and it's. It does depend on what it has to deal with, but for the most part. You're getting it as information, you're not taking action on it.
Right.
I mean, there's some nuance.
People expressing
But-
their viewpoints on a particular issue or business that's been brought up to council.
Right, right. For the most part, if I'm copied on it, I'm keeping that record. And especially in the email that they sent, yes, you got it. I don't need your email to also, again, like she was saying, 20 bazillion people on that list.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Any questions? Ours did not.
Yeah. Thank you.
There you go, Leanna, I'm done.
Right? Didn't know what you were signing up for, did you? Okay.
Well, what do we got here? 8:21.